Hello and welcome to the Nextflow Podcast. You're listening to episode 53 and we're coming to you in 2026 and it's good to be back. I need to start off this episode with a bit of an apology to anyone out there who's a regular listener who may have wondered what happened to the Nextflow Podcast in the second half of 2025. I'm just looking back at the website here and episode 52 was the last episode with Australian Biocommons. Really good, but it was in June the 3rd. and then it went a little bit dark in the second half of 25. I do have an excuse. It's not a very good one. I moved house and had lots of renovation work and everyone tells you it's going to take ages. We thought we had such a great plan. It took ages. But I'm back. I've got a new house and I've got my recording setup back and I'm feeling excited and enthusiastic for 2026 and to rejuvenate the Nextflow podcast and come back to you with loads of great new content. And what better way to start off 2026 than with a recap episode? So that's what we've got today. We're going to go back and look at all the best and brightest things that happened in 2025 in the Nextflow ecosystem, talk about some of our favorite bits and pull out some of the juiciest facts for you. So to help me on this adventure today, I've got three guests. I'm really happy to welcome onto the show Rob Syme, who is Scientific Support Lead at Seqera. We've got Marcel, who's the Senior Developer Advocate, and Rob Newman, Product Manager Lead. Thanks, guys, for joining us. It's great to have you on. I think all three of you have been on the podcast before. Yep. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to cramming 6 months of podcast into 45 minutes. No problem at all. No problem.
Exactly. Catch up time. And I think it's not the first time we've had the two Robs on one episode as well. So I'm sure it's going to be fun trying to...
Anytime they're talking about data and replication, you get multiple Robs.
Exactly. Anyway, so let's kick in. We've got a few different kind of broad areas I thought we could touch on. There's loads of stuff happened in 2025 around Nextflow, of course, and Nextflow Language Evolution is kind of really the big juicy topic there. Rob Newman is going to take us through some of the stuff that happened on Seqera platform. And again, lots of updates and improvements there. Marcel is going to take us through some of his highlights from the community, from the Nextflow community and also NF Core. I mean, this is the Nextflow podcast. Rob Syme, what are your highlights from last year with Nextflow itself?
I mean, you sort of hit the nail on the head there, describing this evolution of the language in Nextflow. There are a couple of, as every year, there are two major stable releases of Nextflow, one in April and one in October. And in both cases in 2025, we had these setting in place the changes to evolve the Nextflow language. So it has historically been this DSL built on top of Groovy, and 2025 saw Nextflow hitting its stride and becoming its own language, becoming a bit more opinionated about the syntax. And this is all building to add features for Nextflow developers and Nextflow users. One of the big ones is the new syntax parser, which has been available for some time, particularly for those users of the VSCode extension. So if you're using VSCode in writing Nextflow workflows, you would have noticed the red squiggly underlines saying, hey, this feature or this use of the language is not encouraged anymore. I'm sure I've seen that a lot.
You touched VSCode. This is something else that was new in 2025, right? Maybe I'm jumping ahead a bit.
Yeah, it's a good point. The VSCode extension itself is new and extended, and comes with its own language parser. So now the VSCode extension understands Nextflow syntax, can provide those syntax highlighting, not just highlighting, but sort of syntactic correction in line in your browser before you run Nextflow. I mean, this has, for as long as I've been involved in this community, been one of the top requested features. I think everyone before last year has had the experience of error, curly brace, which is an error saying something in the Nextflow workflow is amiss. But now it's such a refreshing thing to be able to see it as you type and as you commit the error, rather than waiting till you run it.
The VS Code extension has been around for years, actually, but and people used to say why can't it work the same as other VS Code extensions? Why can't we have those squiggly lines? Now, I don't know how many people in the audience will have actually looked into the VS Code before, but until now, it was a TextMate syntax extension. And basically what that means is it was hundreds of lines of regular expressions. It was just incomprehensible and very dumb. And now, I mean, this is a game changer, right? Now it actually understands the syntax, it understands the code. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah, it's one of those things that for a long time I thought was impossible. I thought, this is just what it is to be a DSL on top of the native language. And Ben has worked incredibly hard and done what I thought was impossible. And now it is just like much more formal, strict syntax. And the lovely thing about this is it gives you a hint as to what is in the future, because it lays the foundations for features that we're building inside the language. And if you're interested in making sure your workflow will be compatible in the future, there are a couple of ways and features that you now have access to. The first is Nextflow Lint, which is something you can run in the command line. You also bundle it into GitHub Actions, things like that on every commit or every PR. You can have it automatically identify uses of language features which will be deprecated. There's Nextflow Format, which you can also run on the CLI, which will do as much as it can automatically. So just sort of bring your workspace up to speed. And if you want to run your workflows with the new syntax parser, it's available from 2504 with the environment variable NXF syntax parser equals v2. So you set that, then not only will you be like developing with the new workflow syntax, but you will actually be running with the new workflow syntax, which not only sort of disables the deprecated features, but also gives you access to fun new features like workflow outputs and typed inputs, I think is one of the new ones. Workflow outputs is actually now available by standard in all Nextflow versions, but parameterized and typed inputs is one of the new ones.
There was a lot there. So let's just break a couple of those down. But I want to touch on a couple of things. Format, firstly, is one of my favorite commands because I have been a huge fan of Black for Python formatting and Markdown Lint, Prettier, Rough, all these different languages.
Go font.
Exactly.
Go. So great.
Like it's a bit like the VS Code extension. We're all writing these other languages, and we have our favorite features. And one of the things I love auto formatters because I just don't have to think about it. It just takes it out of my brain. There's no arguing. PRs have smaller diffs, and now we have that in Nextflow, right? Where you can just chuck Nextflow code at it, and it will move everything around and reorganize things in a really super standardized way. And then what else? So you're talking about how there's an environment variable that you have to kind of pass to Nextflow so it uses the new language parser. That's really important.
I've seen a lot of people who are running Nextflow in production. They've started on their test instances or their staging instances, running those same workflows with that language, that NXF syntax parser equals v2 enabled, just so they can make sure that everything will be up to scratch.
If people flick this switch on and they're using the new syntax parser, does that mean that their pipelines will no longer work with the older versions of Nextflow?
No. Everything should be backwards compatible. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, I will stop interrupting you. You were flowing. You were.
No. That's great. No, I appreciate the interruptions. So above and beyond the syntax parsers, one of actually my favorite feature by a long way is Lineage, which was available in 2504. So anyone who's spoken to me in real life will probably have had an ear bashing about this at some point, but I hate paths, and I'm like terrified by the fact that people refer to the inputs as like the file in this location, because that can change over time. The lineage tracking feature that's now built into Nextflow will build you nice JSON objects and write them to standardized locations, which is great. Like to have tracking, but it also has this really cool feature, which means you can refer, particularly if you're chaining pipelines, if you have Nextflow for doing some pre-processing, and then you have a separate pipeline to take that input, the outputs of that, and do something else. You can, instead of referring as an input a file in this location, you can say, I want as an input to this second pipeline the file that was produced by this other workflow. And so implicitly you have the full lineage, not only of this workflow, but of the inputs to that workflow. And so you can trace all the way back. It's really important. I think not quite, it's hard to sort of understand, but when you see it in practice, and particularly when you have to answer those questions, it's like, okay, so this is the third workflow in a chain here. How is the input to the first workflow generated? When you're able to answer that question, both for legal reasons, but also just for scientific reasons, just in case you wanted to double check what the impacts of those inputs were, that's really important.
I think you're being quite modest here. As I think a big chunk of why this feature was developed was your input. I remember, Rob, I think, was it the 2023 Seqera retreat, or maybe even earlier than that? I remember sitting down, I think it was Rob Newman, I'm pretty sure you were there as well, maybe Marcel. I remember sitting down at a table outside the restaurant and putting my phone on the table, recording, and being like, right, Rob, tell me all about this lineage stuff again. Tell me all about your crazy kind of blockchain ideas and all that. And you've done an NF Core bite-sized talk about this as well, right? If people want to go deeper.
Yeah. And like it's work continues, and I'm still hacking away at plugins and things like that to make this. I would like to try and get sort of adoption of this and try and make sure people understand it. But yeah, I think it's going to be great. It is great.
It's a feature that I'm really excited about with Nextflow, and I find it more difficult than almost any, like when we talk about Nextflow lint and format, it's easy to get excited about it. It's easy to convey why it's going to make people's lives better. With Nextflow Lineage, it's one of these really like low level things, which I think is going to become fundamental to the future of how people use Nextflow, but it's really hard to explain why people should care about it today. You did a great job of it in your recap there. And I think it's such a low level feature. It's got so much potential for us to build on top of it now.
The nice thing about it is that, like, if you're a little curious, you can just turn it on with lineage.enable equals true in your Nextflow config, and it'll start writing, dump it, point it to an S3 path or a shared file system location. It costs basically nothing to enable. And then should you at some time in the future be interested in those provenance, you can query those collection of JSON files for that lineage information, or even build your own tools on top of it if that's necessary. So yeah, try it, turn it on, and just give it a go.
Another benefit of turning it on is that one of the things I find myself talking about with Lineage is if you have a cache miss, so if something is not resumed properly and you don't know why, Lineage just makes it super easy to compare those two outputs, and it lists out everything that was in the cache hash, so you can see exactly why. And you don't have to do anything with dump channels. You don't have to rerun any workflows, because if you're already saving Lineage from every run, all that data has already been put to disk.
Yeah, that task cache is, it's a great point. Has the full provenance of the tasks, not just the workflow outputs.
Okay.
And so I talked a little bit about plugins there. And one of my favorite features also that came out of 2025 was a new sort of approach to plugins in the Nextflow ecosystem. And that is a couple of features. Firstly, there's been some development on the sort of little example plugin repository, which used to involve a bunch of Gradle commands that were a little bit intimidating, certainly in a pre-LLM era, less intimidating these days, but in a pre-LLM era was intimidating for some. So that we've built some features around the way the plugins are built to make the sort of the minimal plugin repository a lot more grokkable and easy to understand. But in addition to that, and sort of accompanying that, is we have a new plugin registry, which is hosted by us at registry.nextflow. And so this has modernized the sort of plugin registry away from a JSON file on a GitHub. So previously we were reliant on GitHub to host this, and if there were outages at GitHub, plugins wouldn't work. And so we wanted to move away from that, something we control, so that we can provide a little bit more time on. And so this is both a safer and sort of more secure way to download plugins, but it also means that if you're developing plugins, you can upload those plugins to that registry and use it to advertise the fact that this plugin exists. Get descriptions and readmes and a searchable interface for all the available Nextflow plugins. So I'd recommend you check it out.
It's not a Seqera only plugin repository, right? Anyone can upload their plugins. And I did it myself. And actually, the experience is so nice. Like claiming a plugin, which is the language we use there, it's so easy and straightforward. So if you have a plugin yourself, it's very easy to upload there. And the great thing is that once it's uploaded there, it's very easy to import in anyone else's pipeline through the internet, right? So having a central registry, that's the gotcha of that. So I had a great experience uploading, like claiming plugins there. And if you have any plugin of yourself, I really recommend you try it.
We can see that in effect now as well, because honestly, I mean, Nextflow plugins have been around for years and years, but there haven't been very many. You've had to be really dedicated to walk through the fire of plugin development. But since we've released this new registry only a few months ago, we've seen the number of new plugins just explode. That's so good. That's a sign of a healthy ecosystem, right? That's what we want, is for people to build on top of Nextflow.
You have some plugins which are very aimed at broad application. You have things like the CO2 footprint plugin, which is like workflow agnostic plugins that are like useful for everyone. And then you've got plugins for particular ecosystems or products, like the Databricks plugin. And then you might have at the other end of the spectrum, like plugins for a particular group's limb system that are only really relevant for that particular group. So like whether you would like to develop a feature for global usage, or whether you just want to make your life a little bit easier and your research group's life a little bit easier by hooking into some of your own internal systems, the plugin system offers you, both of those groups of people, something interesting.
There are 2 points in your recap, Rob, that I wanted to flag as well. One thing is there's the new template GitHub repo, which you mentioned, which is, you're right, we can now click on that and it's updated and it's much better. There's also a new Nextflow command. You can do Nextflow plugins create, and Nextflow will prompt you for a few placeholder variables, and then it will create a plugin for you based on that template repo, but it just pre-fills a few things. So that's kind of a small, nice thing. And there was also a couple of motivations for the new registry. You talked about scalability, that we were pulling this huge JSON file off GitHub every single time you ran Nextflow, which is kind of not ideal, and uptime. There's also some other kind of fundamental features that the registry gives us. It's backed by an API, a publicly accessible API, which we encourage anyone to build off. And one thing it does build off that API is, going back, the language server, the VSCode extension uses it. And what it does is, when it does a static analysis of your Nextflow code, it looks at the config. And until now, if you had any config that came from a plugin, the language server didn't know about the code that was in that plugin, and it can only know about it by running the plugin, which we don't want to do because we're doing static analysis. So what it does now is it queries the registry, and the registry has a static analysis of every plugin, and from that it can pull back all the different config scopes. So now we have rich developer experience for configs around plugins, thanks to the plugin registry. And that's one example of different new functionality that we can build in, which is impossible with the previous system. Sorry, I'm nerding out.
Well, if we're in the mood for nerding out, there is one other important feature that I want to talk about that was in 25.10, which is the switch. This is deep in Nextflow, but this is a switch to the new AWS SDK, which is a lot of letters in quick succession, but it's a really important change for Nextflow. So the AWS SDK, the software development kit, the sort of library that AWS provides to interact via Java with the AWS API and services, reached end of life. The version 1 reached end of life, I think, in the end of last year. And as of 25.10, ships with the new NF Amazon plugin, which uses that AWS SDK too. And this is more than just a version bump this is a complete rewrite of all of the ways Nextflow interacts with AWS. And granted, AWS is only one of the many executors, but it's a big part of the Nextflow ecosystem. So that, like all of the AWS services, whether it's S3, Batch, EC2, ECS, CloudWatch, SDS, like all of these services under the hood are now changed. The most important, I think, is probably the way it interacts with S3. We have this new high performance S3 transfer manager. So all of the S3 interactions are much faster, and that's really important, particularly for people running at serious scale when you have thousands or tens of thousands of tasks running at once. This is particularly relevant if you are using also the new virtual threads option, which is an option that you can turn on via an environment variable. So this is a feature that's only available in Java 21 and above. But you can turn that on in combination with the new AWS SDK v2. It means that instead of having a pool of connections that Nextflow can use to communicate with AWS, which can be exhausted at times, if you have these two new options enabled, you have really efficient communication with AWS. And so instead of consuming a pool of resources, it's very, very cheap to generate these and just park the threads that are communicating with AWS. And so you can have tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of tasks communicating with the AWS S3. And because the threads are so cheap, you'll never exhaust that thread pool. We just park the threads and we just communicate and as the comms come in with AWS. It's a lovely feature, which means that your Nextflow workflow, if it works on small data, it also works at massive scale. And there's no more configuration changes that you have to sort of step up to as you scale.
You're right. That was nerdy, but I enjoyed it.
I have to talk about it here because if I don't talk about it here, you won't even notice. Like, that's the wonderful thing about these features. It's one of those features that took a lot of work. Again, thank you, Ben Sherman, for putting in the effort here, and put in a lot of effort so that people don't notice when your Nextflow runs scale without an issue. So I have to talk about it here. And if you've ever had that connection thread pool timeout exhausted error in Nextflow, if you're doing massive runs, if you switch these on now, it won't be an issue.
Yeah, and there's a blog post, right, where we checked out some of the benchmarking results on upload and download speed. So if you're interested, you can read a bit more there.
Faster, more efficient, better in every way. It's fantastic.
The unsung heroes of open source development, when people like Jorge pushing these features out, and you never notice that Nextflow just doesn't crash quite as much as it used to. It's like incremental improvements, but they're super important. You touched on it earlier, but it's such an important feature. You talked about workflow inputs and outputs and static types. We're going to have a whole episode based on this. So if you were interested in this, there's a talk about it from the Nextflow Summit last year. Ben and I had a webinar, and we're going to go deep on a podcast in a month or two about this. But Rob, just tell us a little bit more about what these are and why they're important.
So I think everyone who's developed Nextflow is very familiar with the idea of publishing outputs from a workflow via the publishDir directive, which is attached inside of a process. And this is really a holdover and an anachronism from the way back in the day, the first version of the Nextflow language was developed. That it becomes a little bit of a challenge if you've got modules and processes, which is sort of the belly of the beast of a workflow, being the thing that emits the outputs, which is sort of the external interface between the workflow and the consumers of that workflow, the people going to be consuming the data. So Nextflow languages moved to this new system of workflow outputs, which is one end, and then so the workflow itself now has outputs. So rather than publishing files from processes or modules, now the workflow itself, that top level, is responsible for publishing the files. And my favorite thing about this feature is that you're basically publishing channels rather than publishing files. So the beautiful thing about Nextflow is that you have this system, this data flow system, where you have the metadata and the files together attached, flowing through the workflow itself. So there's no idea of having to reach out somewhere else to grab the metadata. And the workflow outputs allow you to publish channels. Gives you lovely things like automatically generating sample sheets or JSON YAML structured data, which has the metadata and the paths to those output files all together. And the sort of symmetrical end of this is typed inputs. So Nextflow optionally now, using the strict parser, you can define the inputs to the workflow. So this is inside of the language itself, inside the workflow, sort of an amendment or an improvement on the Nextflow schema.json.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for inputs is basically a kind of a bit of a shuffle on how params and parameters are defined in a workflow. It used to be that params were kind of just in a config, but then you referenced them directly like within processes. Again, it's that kind of scope and kind of very wide ranging. Whereas now params with workflow inputs, they go at workflow level and they also have much more metadata. I remember sitting in the lunchroom at SciLife Lab with Paolo in like 2020, talking to him about this new Nextflow schema thing I'd come up with and talking whether we could extend the config. It's taken us a while to get there, but now we're working towards a future where there'll be basically one-to-one parity with the Nextflow schema.json file and also the language itself. So Nextflow will be fully aware of types. So if it's a Boolean, then it will validate everything, whether it's a number, it's a string. And then those params are much more powerful, much better defined, and we can then pass them into the workflow. And like you say, it's that interface between pipelines, right? Rob Newman, I think you're going to touch on pipeline chaining in a little bit. It's these fundamentals which are kind of requirements for then doing more stuff downstream outside of Nextflow itself. And when I was talk about these types variables, I mean, type params, that's huge. And we'll see this as we go into 2026 with more language features coming. The variable typing system is going to become a really important part of Nextflow. It's so important and it's so well liked in other languages, and it's now going to start coming to Nextflow, and it gives you type safety and much more rich intelligence about the code, so that Nextflow knows what kinds of variables are being passed around. It can spot typos and errors ahead of time, and just basically provide a much better developer experience.
And a better experience for the users of the workflows. Like Nextflow is this beautiful language and it's so lovely to develop in Nextflow. But the people who are using the workflows, who are running Nextflow run and of course RNA-seq on my data, they don't care how beautiful and elegant and fun it was to develop the workflow. They care about the data. And so this is Nextflow pushing into being a little bit more opinionated and helping people either side of that workflow, not just like presumably the listeners of this podcast, the people developing the workflows.
Yeah. And also it's a very nice circular topic, Rob, that you brought us onto there, because it brings us back to Lineage. Because again, I remember you saying in frustration to me years ago, Nextflow has all this information, it knows all this history, it's got all this metadata, and you get to the end and you publish the files and you just chuck it away. But now, workflow outputs and Lineage, we're actually holding on to all of that, and we can now use it.
It's also a little bit of watch this space as well, because I know this is 2025 retro, but in terms of 2026, we're going to be using that data as well in the platform as well.
Yeah. 2025 was all about foundations, I kind of feel like, and 2026 is hopefully where we see some of these bear fruit. Okay, Rob Newman, tell us a little bit about some of your highlights of 2025.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that affects most users of Nextflow who are also platform users will probably be the pipeline specific changes that we've made, and specifically the new pipeline run details page. That was a big change that was pushed out prior to the Boston Summit earlier this year. And now we have a progress bar defining clear changes in as the pipeline progresses. Now we also have a dedicated run info tab. We also have a task tab that is the default now, so you can easily drill down into those tasks. And also for those of us that are using containers, there's now a containers tab as well, so you can really drill down and see what is being built. So that was probably the biggest one coming out of the first half of the year that probably affects a lot of users.
It's a good feature when I can't even remember what the old run page looked like anymore. Like I was trying to remember kind of what it looked like previously, and I'm so used to the new one now. It doesn't annoy me. It doesn't get in the way. I just think about what it's showing me. And I think that's a sign of a good design. Yeah.
It gets out of the way when it needs to and shows you what you need.
This pipeline, there's so much information you would like to have, right? And to organize it in a way that it looks good is a very difficult job.
Yeah, I think like you're saying, it shows very high level, like core or critical information that you need to know about your pipeline. But if you really want to, you can really, really drill down at the task level and really get fine-grained information and to help you troubleshoot pipelines especially.
Shout out also to one of, again, this is I feel like the podcast is the home for all the unloved, unnoticed features. And there's one here in the pipeline page, which I think is one of my favorite features, actually. If you go to a task table and you click a task and it brings up the modal with all the details, there's a little tab hidden there. And I can't actually remember what it's called now, but it's called like data or something like that in this little pop-up modal. And that will load up Data Explorer if it works on your compute environment and show you all the files in that work directory of that task. And it's 2 clicks to get there. And you can just see it in platform. And I love it. And I think a lot of people don't realize it's there, which is probably on us to make it a bit more like obvious, but it's so cool. Again, it's like low friction. And I love that.
Huge benefit for people, particularly for people who are used to operating on HPC. So the Nextflow diehards who've grown up on HPC, where you can cd into the work directory, bash.command.run to run a single task and just grab the isolated idempotent task, the unit of the workflow. And then when they moved to cloud, they found their data is a long way away. It's not accessible or viewable in the same way. And then that feature that you're describing there, Phil, operating on the task directory, the task working directory, via Data Explorer, it gives you that sense that, oh, okay, I'm back to my familiar, like this thing is not obfuscated, it's not invisible, it's presented and here for me.
I also think one of the features that maybe came in under the radar for many people as well is this idea of dynamic resource labels. So you can have, there's labels and there's resource labels, but there's also the ability now to do dynamic resource labels, which is the Nextflow process ID and also the workflow ID. And if you really want to drill down and understand what is costing how much in your platform, like in your pipeline runs, you can now do that. And with these dynamic resource labels, they automatically resolve themselves at execution time. So it allows you to just set one key and value, and then that resolves itself. And you can then go into your cost allocation reports in your cloud provider and really get an understanding of, even though it's in a shared compute environment, how much did this execution of this run cost? It's like, it's a big deal. And it's kind of, again, a little bit hidden in the weeds as well. Yeah. And then I think something that is really important as well for our users that I've been discussing with our users of Nextflow for almost a year now has been this idea of pipeline versioning. So this idea of versioning and pinning specific versions is really going to allow enterprise customers especially be able to leverage this idea of different per workflow configurations. It was talked about for the Barcelona Summit, and if people are interested, it's in private preview right now. But that's going to be a really big deal for customers who are doing pipelines at scale.
Yeah, I mean, going back to my previous life, I remember having like lists of pipelines, like RNA-seq version 3.1, RNA-seq version like 1.1, and so on, and just in a huge list because we'd want to keep running one version while we're kind of testing and validating the next version and so on. And now it's all sort of sucked together in one place.
Yeah, it's a really powerful feature. And then one of the other features that we've still on the topic of pipelines that a lot of our users have been talking about is this idea of pipeline chaining or automation. And I think, Phil, you did the Node-RED. Was it in an earlier podcast or was it just a blog post?
It's just a blog post. I'm hoping to dig into it a bit in a future episode because obviously it's a bit of a pet project of mine.
Yeah, but, I think you showed us actually during a meeting when a pipeline execution successfully passes or completes, you get like flashing lights in your room because you've got like smart lights attached to your home and network, and that was pretty cool.
So for context here, for people who've never heard of this before, Node-RED is an open source package. It's been around for donkey's years, and it's Internet of Things. So it's used lots in industry, if you've got a factory and stuff like this, or any event-driven system where you have like a flow of data and you want to kind of do stuff with it and build automation. And it's a kind of a low-code system, so it's drag and drop interface, but you can put in JavaScript and stuff. I've been using it for... You know what? It's actually Evan who got me into this because when I joined Seqera ages ago, or even before I joined Seqera, I noticed on his GitHub profile that he was a member of the Home Assistant organization. And I was like, what's that? And then I found out what it is. It's a open source platform for doing home automation. I have it running on Raspberry Pi. I got into that. I got into Node-RED for my home stuff. And then I was like, oh, you could use this for automation of pipelines and platform. And so my first demo was in Home Assistant because that's where I had it running, and I made all my lights flash and stuff like that. And I showed it in that meeting. What Rob's not really saying is everyone was like, "Great, Phil. Is that useful?"
Well, also you need to bring the sizzle. So that there's a little bit of sizzle there. So it's showing people it's a very sort of obvious way of like seeing all these different interactions across different network devices. But what I think we're seeing is the evolution of that, where people are saying, oh, well, if there's different events that trigger other events, then why not triggering a pipeline when that successfully executes, trigger another pipeline or trigger another 3 pipelines? And that is where the usefulness comes in. And we're starting to see customers really adopting that.
Yeah, so I'll come back to this in another episode in more detail, but if you're interested, just Google Seqera Node-RED, and it's now like there's a website with docs, and there's a whole load of video tutorials I've done as well, including one with a disco at the end if that's all you care about. But yeah, you can do all sorts. You can spin up studios as well, Rob. I know studios is your kind of passion, and like, so, the pipeline finishes, you can launch a studio and then send a message into Slack saying, hey, this pipeline finished, here's a running studio with our IDE or whatever, like, ready to do the downstream analysis. You can do basically anything you can think of. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really extensible, which I think is really fantastic. I guess talking about extensibility, it's maybe a good time to talk about, we have all these new single cloud VM compute environment families that we've now released. So on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, we have, these small compute environments that you can build, which were really built to address these like long launch delays when you're using batch computing services within the major cloud providers. So now with these new single VM compute environments, you get much faster startup times. I think 4 to 6 times faster in terms of compute startup times. And also, I think I actually did a poll earlier this year of all the scientific development team at Seqera, and I was like, hey, what is like the biggest eureka moment that you had when you first started using Seqera? And everyone said batch forge, right? The ability to create on-the-fly compute environments. And compute environments are amazing, especially as those batch services provide new features. Like, we want to incorporate those new features, and we get feature requests all the time for compute environments. But a lot of times customers just want a super simple, give me a vanilla compute environment, make provision, go fast. That's all they really care about. And these single cloud VM compute environments have designed specifically for that. So super quick, fast uptime, very little configuration that is required by the user, many fewer dependencies, and they come with things like spot instance support out of the box. So if you have a relatively small scale pipeline with quite well defined resources that you're going to consume, those are by far the fastest way of executing your pipelines. And obviously, if you've got a very large pipeline, like, I don't know, like a Sarek pipeline, for example, that are relatively complex, we still recommend that you use the batch services. But these single compute environments have been really powerful and really, really well adopted by customers.
It's that fast startup time is just, it makes it so much easier to test stuff. You can just kick it off, and you have to wait a few seconds rather than 5-10 minutes for batch to get around to running your workflow. It's really good.
Yeah. There's like lovely efficiency gains at that upper end, the batch forging, when you might have a large team of people and suddenly you can share resources and sort of pack lots of tasks into a single large virtual machine. But it's surprising how far along the spectrum that actually starts to make sense. For a lot of work and a lot of teams, I imagine, it actually is more cost effective to be running on single VMCEs, not just the experience of the startup time, but even in a cost sense. But of course, it's lovely to know that when you pass that threshold, switch to batch forge, or even beyond that, switch to your own custom Terraform setup and build your own batch CEs. But like all of those, you've got an option.
Yeah, true. Actually, you did mention the Terraform piece there as well, which is
love me some Terraform.
Yeah, like you can build all the resources in the platform using Terraform now, which is a big thing that we rolled out this year as well. Which is, I would encourage people to go look that up as well.
Listen to the podcast. I've asked I've asked Ken and Adam to join me to record another episode pretty soon about Terraform. So we're gonna dive deep on why Ken cares so much about Terraform, because it is a lot.
Ken has convinced me. It is amazing, and I'm looking forward to that podcast.
Yeah, it's a big deal, especially for customers who already have enterprise cloud deployments of other infrastructure, and they're using Terraform already. It's, it just simplifies their provisioning, their security posture, everything related to that. Yeah, it's really powerful. But speaking of compute, a big thing that we released this year was Seqera Compute, which is Seqera providing these fully managed compute environments for you. And it's literally now, if you are a new user to the platform, you can sign up and you get $100 of free compute credits. And what we do is you add your pipeline, we create a bucket on your behalf. Well, at the very bottom level, we create an AWS tenant on your behalf, and that we manage. And then we create buckets for you, and then we create compute environments for you that you can use. So for customers who are, Marcel's keeping me honest here. We need institutional emails for users to be able to sign up. But what we've seen is customers who are used to using Nextflow, and they're not sure about what their compute environment needs even are, right? They're not sure, like, how many CPUs do I want to allocate? What's the sort of memory I need to allocate? What even sort of flavor of compute environment do I need? It allows users to come in and really bootstrap and get a baseline understanding of what their compute requirements are, without any sort of like lock-in. So they can just come in and slowly, incrementally learn by doing.
So it's a huge opportunity that Seqera is providing for people to get more about Seqera platform, all the features. You can play with your own pipeline, with your data, and then you really get the value of the platform. So I think it's a great rewarding experience in terms of what you can do with real data, real pipeline, and so on.
It was always a bit of a blocker when showing people in the past, like, yeah, come and try out Seqera platform. Okay, now go and create an AWS account and put in your credit card details. And everyone was like, not so sure about that. Whereas now you can kind of get running in a couple of clicks. And then also, if your Seqera credits run out, then everything stops. And it's not like AWS where, you can accidentally run up bills for thousands and thousands of dollars on your credit card. So it's easier, it's also safer, which I like.
And I think to sort of like round out the last sort of first section around compute, I would be remiss if I wasn't talking about Fusion Snapshots as well. So if you're running a Nextflow pipeline and that spot instance gets reclaimed, Fusion now does a great job of snapshotting and checkpointing of where you got to in that pipeline run.
Yeah, it's fantastic because up until Fusion Snapshots, Nextflow has this inbuilt like task resumption mechanism. And so even a workflow is broken down into tasks, and that becomes the unit. So before snapshots, if a task gets interrupted, it will resume from the beginning of the task, not from the beginning of the workflow. But for a lot of people, they have tasks and processes that can't be broken down into smaller pieces. Like this thing is going to run for a day and a half. And like, that's the way the tool works. I can't, I as a workflow author can't break it down into a smaller piece. And if your task is running for above 6 or 12 hours, it's hard to get the cost benefit of spot instances because your task is to get reclaimed, then restart again, and then reclaimed again. So what this does is allow it, as the task progresses and the snapshot comes in, it saves the state, the running task to S3, and then on restart, it resumes from that state. So you don't have to go back to the beginning of the task. So it's great for people who either don't want to because it takes development time or can't break their task into smaller pieces. And you get the benefit of the cost benefit of Spot, which is 90% in most cases, and around about it's substantially cheaper.
When I first started using clouds, the spot market was so different to how it is today as well. Like it used to be when I used to run things on AWS on Spot, that basically almost nothing got reclaimed. So it was just a no-brainer to run on Spot, like it was obvious. But if you look at some stats on interruption rate, AWS has like kind of tweaked how the spot market works, and capacity planning has basically got better, I think, by AWS over time. And the spot market's got squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And now when you run a large workflow on Spot, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to have at least some tasks will be reclaimed. And so, yeah, that balance between whether it's worth it anymore has become much harder to justify. And with Fusion Snapshots, we're back in the good old days where it's just like, yeah, you tick that box and it's free money. I've asked Lorenzo from what was the Fusion team to join me on the podcast pretty soon. So we're going to do a deep dive on this because I think it is really interesting. And he really knows his stuff, and I'm hoping he can teach me and explain it to me like I'm a 6-year-old.
He's also very deserving of the moniker of wizard as well. Like if there's one person, there's a few people who work at Seqera who deserve the term wizard. He's definitely one of them. I remember him giving a talk all about programming a very basic Casio digital watch.
Don't give it away. That's one of the ways I got him to agree to give a podcast.
Nice. Well, I think moving on, one of the biggest things, and I don't think this is purely like Nextflow or Seqera is AI, right? And shout out to the growth and AI team has been building Seqera AI, and especially, supporting the ability to explore and pull in like SRA hosted data, having pipeline mode, so where you can load in GitHub repos, you can and ask questions about those repositories, like what does this piece do, what does this process do, and get really like useful and helpful feedback there. And it's actually allowing our users to build, well, either customize existing pipelines to their own requirements or build brand new pipelines. It's been pretty amazing to see that explosion.
I was going to say, like, Rob dropped a message in the chat saying we've done well to get this far through the podcast episode without mentioning AI. I mean, I'm sure 2025 is going to be talked about as the year that AI exploded, right? Especially in kind of anything to do with programming. It's everything has changed, and I think what stands out to me about Seqera AI is I mean, we have a pretty small team working on this, and we're up against some of the best funded companies that have ever existed building this out. And the fact that they've been able to pivot and stay fresh and sort of keep up to date with all the things which are happening in this ridiculously fast moving field, and also carve ourselves a niche where Seqera AI is able to provide value over these massive players, I think is huge. Like they've done an amazing job. And honestly, I can't quite believe how good Seqera AI is and how useful it is. And and also the way that it can, if you're using a Seqera platform, it has its kind of its roots down into a system. So you can ask it about specific runs and explain to me why this failed. And that all goes back to that kind of core mission of improving developer experience and user experience. And yeah,
it's just crazy. Like I've been working with AI for, I don't know, 20 years or something like this. My undergraduate, my master, my PhD, everything. And when all this thing exploded, I play away with ChatGPT and stuff, but I wasn't bought by the idea, right? And when Claude and Cursor and all these guys and Lovable and all these others started appearing, I mean, now I feel guilty that I cannot tell this to more people in my 24 hours, right? Like I was bored late 2025. I was bored. I was like, I'm going to write an Nextflow plugin, and I use Seqera AI. In a matter of a few hours, I had it ready with the documentation, with the code, with everything. The plugin was ready. The next day, it was already in the Nextflow registry. Paolo had already accepted my claim request. All the documentation, well-written, commented, tested. I had hundreds of tests that I wrote together with Seqera AI to confirm everything was working. And it works great. So now I'm like, everyone, if you want to write a plugin, run with Seqera AI. Write your plugin with Seqera AI. It's going to be great. It's going to solve your problems, right? So I'm amazed at Seqera AI. Really, isn't? I mean, we have had Seqera AI for over a year. And on Seqera, I'm happy we have it. But in the past 2 months, I think, I just got completely in love with it.
I think as a developer, before AI, I felt like a race car driver. And then when the early models before sort of June last year, I felt like I'd been demoted to the guy who watches cars on a Scalextric track and just picks them up when they fall off. And then just like, I felt that was my job. But I think like late 2025 with Seqera AI and other models, like it feels like, okay, now that we're really moving, like this is genuinely useful. And I love Marcel's example of plugin development because it ties into what we were talking about earlier with the new improved plugin development experience, be it a small idea or a big idea, to improve the way you develop workflows or your users use those workflows and track with them. It's a great time to just give it a go. So I'm looking forward to a future plugin episode.
Sorry, Rob Newman, carry on.
I know so much to get through. I think, kind of just putting a bow on the Seqera AI piece was, the MCP server as well that came out at the tail end of last year. I think it was like October. And, again, talking about wizards, this is Paolo and a few of the other members of the team, like cooking this up in the evenings or on the weekends over a few days. And, I don't want to speak for the demos. Like you should go and look at some of the presentations from the Barcelona Summit at the end of the year around the MCP server. And, you know, just this ability to plug in your Seqera platform into Claude, into Cursor, into Copilot, ask questions of it. You know, it has authentication built in, right? So it's super secure. So yeah, being able to look at your query history, you know, debug pipelines. It's pretty amazing. Cool. All right, I'll talk about a few other things. I guess a big one initially with Data Explorer is, you know, this has become the de facto way of users to explore data either created by pipelines or to define inputs to pipelines. I mean, it's always been reserved for cloud-based object storage. And what the team have done is create Data Explorer to work on any S3 compatible API object storage. So, you know, there's a lot of HPC systems that have S3 compatible APIs. And so now you can connect Data Explorer to that, which is a huge deal. Like it makes the platform now accessible to a whole different range of users. And also other object storage providers like Minio is the de facto standard. And so many different providers, Cloudflare comes to mind, Oracle comes to mind, you know, they're all using S3 compatible APIs. And so now this ability of just pulling in data from any of these providers or, you know, hosting services into the platform is, you know, literally a couple of clicks.
Super cool.
Yeah, and then, you know, we also did a huge amount of work on datasets, right? Well, first of all, there's no quota anymore, so that quota's been lifted. So for users who had like a, you know, a limit around a workspace, that's gone. But now you have the ability to show and hide datasets. So prior to this work, you know, if you had lots and lots of datasets, it was kind of really hard to understand which ones do I really care about. So now you can show and hide different datasets dynamically. You can also add labels to it, and there's also additional metadata that you can now query for in the datasets interface. And then I think one of the really nice features is that you can now look at all of the runs that a dataset was used in. So in the datasets tabular view, there's a new column, and you can just click on that, and it will take you directly into the pipeline runs page and basically show you all the pipeline runs that have just used that dataset. So that's sort of like much more robust integrated tissue across the platform has been really popular with our users.
Yeah. It's a lovely example of Seqera being a lot more interested in data. So both like where was this data set used as input, and then coming this year, hopefully where's this file produced, sort of pushing either side of the workflow into provenance and the ingestion.
Yeah, and then the last thing I think to talk about is studios. It's kind of funny. That's been the focus a lot of focus of my attention since I joined Seqera, and I think this year was when we really started to see whole scale adoption of that. The number of users using it, the number of people who are building really cool, interesting, customized studios as well that we never really imagined people doing. It's been the flexibility and the extensibility of Docker files and the ability to kind of build your own analysis environment, like, you know, BYOC, bring your own container, is just amazing. And there's a couple of good blog posts from 2025 from the scientific development team that kind of talked about, you know, things like Marimo or Cell by Gene, you know, or even just like Shiny applications that, you know, provide these really rich dashboards for interacting with data. It's been really amazing to see what our users have been building. And we've also added things like support for the single VM compute environments that I talked about earlier. We've enriched the interface with resource labels. You know, you can now define environment variables. It supports like ARM64 architectures. Spot instances are now supported. And then I guess the piece de resistance was at the end of the year was building the Git integration. So, any Git provider that you have, you can now, in a similar way to pipelines, you can now drop a path to a repo into Studios and it will clone the repository. So, whether it's got pipelines, whether it's got data, whatever it's got, or maybe it's just like notebooks, you can now clone that directly into Studios. And you can even give it raw container files like a Docker file, and it will build that for you. Prior to this, you always used to have to compile your own container and put it up to a container registry. And now it does that on the fly for you, which, for people who want to bootstrap really quickly analysis environments, it's been a real efficiency improvement for them.
I really, that thing with the custom images where you can just drop something in and it just works, it's beautiful. I love it. And it only really struck me at the second half of this year when I started using this more, just how much complexity that kind of takes away. When you run something in Studios, you have user authentication set up. You have firewalls, everything is secure and you didn't do anything, but it's on the internet where the right people can access it from anywhere and start it and stop it. And multiple people can collaborate in a single session. And there's a ton of stuff there. And it might just be a notebook, but actually it's a really powerful thing. And there's also, I feel like Studios has benefited from many small incremental improvements this past year. It's much more stable than it used to be. I'm sure Studios they don't crash nearly as often. And the interface for launching Studios is easier to use. And I don't know, I feel like there's been a lot of paper cuts that have been removed in 25.
Yeah, we did a fair amount of user research. I think that's one of the big things for me towards the second half of the year was that sort of light bulb coming on for a lot of people being like, oh yeah, this works. And it sits adjacent to all of our pipeline runs. And it's in our own infrastructure. We're not having to provision external systems or, third-party proprietary things or environments or systems. Everything just sits in our own infrastructure. Cool. And I think the last thing I wanted to comment on was kind of business related was, we got Series B this year. So I think that's a big shout out to everybody. It allows Nextflow to continue to be developed, with the attention paid to it, which is great. And then we got SOC 2 certified as well, Type 2 certified, which is really great for a lot of our customers.
And it's good news for everybody, right? Healthy Seqera means healthy Nextflow, healthy community. It's also good news for everyone out there listening to the podcast, I hope. Marcel, do you want to start taking us into what's new?
Yeah. So this past year, we had lots of nice things in multiple different ways. In terms of technology, for example, we had 3 releases of the NF Core tools, the one in June, October, and November. And each one of them, there's something I love. I did the 3.3, for example, we had the NF Core test datasets command. That's something that I believe not only me, but whenever I needed to find some test dataset to run my NF Core pipeline or to create a new one, it wasn't very pleasant to go to GitHub and look for a branch and so on and so on. This command makes it so much easier. So NF Core test-datasets, test it, you're going to love it. For the 3.4, we had this overhaul in the NF Core download command. You can download the Docker tar archives for maybe an infrastructure that don't have internet connection. So now you can have their images locally. So many nice things. And the 3.5 is one that I'm very in love, because a big chunk of it is regarding the topics, the usage of topics for the versions. And that's something we worked on in the hackathon in Barcelona. So I think there's a lot of nice things in NF Core tools.
I mean, topics are a fairly new thing, right? I mean, that's maybe a 2025 recap thing, which we missed, was topics coming out in Nextflow itself. Could you briefly tell us what you mean by that?
Topics, technically, it's not a big change, but in my opinion, it has a big impact. The idea of topics that sometimes you want to store information throughout multiple different steps of your pipeline, like the version, right? We have the versions of the modules of the test, and we want to save them somewhere so that in the end, we know the version of all the softwares that we're using in our pipeline. So how do we do that? Before, we would have a big chunk of code in every process so that we'd write to this way, to this place, then get these channels together, then write to, it worked, but it was a lot of code, right? With topics, you can just create a topic, let's call it versions. And in every process of the pipeline, we can easily write to this topic. So I don't care about merging information or bringing to a place or to the other. It's going to be there in the topics channel. So it's a much more organized and clean way to report versions. And version was the obvious way of using topics. But whenever you want to save information from multiple different processes, topics are the easiest way. And I think it's going to be much more fluid. This conversion from just plug it together, putting the input, running the pipeline, it's ready. Yeah, we talked a lot about the syntax and the updates in this podcast, in this episode today, and also about NF Core now. So I think something that some people may be asking is, what's the roadmap for this new syntax adoption in NF Core, right? So we have a blog post where you can see it in more detail. We have an image there when you see when each thing is going to be adopted. The topics was already in Q4 last year. And then you're going to have other things like the strict syntax, the workflow outputs, static types in records, new process syntax. All these things, they're going to be slowly adopted until early 2027. But a big chunk of that is in 2026. So you will see pretty soon a lot of these amazing things by default in NF Core. And talking about community, I mean, it's growing in all different ways, not only in number, but in quality also. We see these people who one day appear asking basic questions about Nextflow. The next day, they're pipeline maintainers, they're creating plugins, they're answering questions on the forum. It always makes me so happy when I see like, oh, this person was like asking basic questions, I don't know, last year. Now they're like a rock star and they're Nextflow ambassadors, right? So it's very nice to see how the community is growing, not only in size, but also in how integrated it is and how people are happy to contribute and so on. So many things like the weekly help desk that we are always answering questions live to people. It was expanded to include Asian Pacific time zones, right? So many nice things. When it comes to infrastructure, we now have the NF Core advisories and so many different things.
I'd love to touch on advisories because I really like this. This is another unsung hero feature a little bit because it's the kind of thing you hope you never need it and you hope you never notice it. But if you do, it's fantastic. And kudos to Matthias from SciLife Lab for putting us together. But basically, what it does is if you're using a particular version of a pipeline, and we know, right, not everyone can update to the latest version of every pipeline every time you run Nextflow. If you're running in production, you need to be fixed at certain versions, you need to validate and everything. So now on the NF Core website, if you go to a specific version of a specific pipeline, if there's a bug that we know affected that pipeline, it shows it in a big red banner at the top. And that's huge because it means like now you know, okay, you really should update because we know there's a bug here which is giving you bad data or whatever. And also it helps with if you have a problem because, you know, if we know that between this version and this version of Nextflow, these pipelines are affected by this thing and this is what we did about it and this is how we fixed it. All of that kind of stuff is documented, kind of like mini blog posts, but specifically about any problems with NF Core pipelines. And we called them advisories. And hopefully you never see them. But yeah, they're there when you need them and they pop up in all the right places. So it's a simple thing, but it's a really nice, and I like it as well because it's a kind of a bit of a mark of maturity, I think, for our community. We know that these pipelines are really, you know, critical, and kind of we try and handle that responsibility.
Yeah, I personally really like the way that the NF project as a whole is evolving, right? With the way we do proposals now, the advisories, the way the core team works, all the teams, right? The maintainers. It's so nice to see it such a mature open source project, right? It's very nice. The advisories, I really like this. Kudos to Matthias. Going on with the community things, we had the Nextflow Summit in Boston earlier last year, in Barcelona late last year. We had now this online summit for Barcelona and the hackathon and training in person was still a lot of fun for those who came in person. The online one was able to have also so many different talks. A lot of people always wanted to present nice things in the summit, but they couldn't come, right? And with the online version now, we really can have the best talks, the best people, regardless of geographical location and so on, right? So I think it was a very good, smart choice to make the Barcelona one online.
All of these talks, by the way, are on YouTube, so dig it out. There's that was a podcast episode I wanted to do, and we didn't. Was a recap of our favorite talks, because there's some really, really juicy ones in there. I mean, like you say, people coming from all over the planet as well. We had a talk from NASA this time, which has been on my bucket list for ages, because I knew they've been writing Nextflow pipelines for quite a few years, and now we got them in to give a talk. And there's so many good talks there. It was a fantastic event, and also because it was online, something else we did for Barcelona was running talks in multiple tracks, which meant that we managed to get a lot of talks in. It was just it was a cool event.
Yeah. So we have starting now, like this actually today was the kickoff call for the 5th cohort of our ambassador program, right? It started late 2023 with the first cohort starting in early 2024, right? And it's been such a great adventure in all these 2 years and a few months. I was looking at the number of statistics today. We have had in the past 24 months over 600 activities, a lot of things conducted by ambassadors. Not that ambassador was there, conducted by ambassadors, right? A huge number. And we always have, we started with 45 people in 16 countries, and it kept growing, right? And it's been 3 cohorts that the number doesn't change a lot between 128, 134. So it's this number didn't grow a lot. But this time we got to 40 countries. So we have now 40 countries with Nextflow ambassadors residing there, which means that actually the impact is larger because, for example, we have people that are in UK, but they are from Iraq and they go there regularly to give Nextflow trainings or something like this. We have Kubra in Germany, who's from Turkey, right? And she goes there often to give training and so on. So if we talk about the number of countries we can easily have impact, it's way more than 40, right? Like João Vitor from Brazil, he went to Chile to give a training, right? So it's like amazing numbers for the project, for the program. And so far, people seem happy. So I think we've done like lots of trainings, lots of in-person activities. Like last year, from the 300 and something activities we had, 170 were in person. Most of the training sessions were in person, right? So it's so many nice things we are getting from the master program. People also happy about being in the community and learning more Nextflow. Lots of ambassadors, they are not experts when they join the program. They know some basic Nextflow and they develop the skills during the program. They learn how to write better, how to give talks, how to give training and so on. So it's a great program for people to join and also to learn. So many nice things. And well, if you want to be an ambassador, you can just go to the Nextflow.io website, go to the resources next to ambassador, you apply. At the end of every semester, we evaluate the applications and you start in the next one. So we just started the 5th cohort. There's something new that we've been doing last year and I also like a lot, which are the training weeks, right? I mean, you can always learn Nextflow. We have the training.nextflow.io website. You can just go there, learn Nextflow. You have the GitHub code spaces environment with everything installed and configured for you to use. You just go there, read, and do it. But well, when things are too easy and always there for us, sometimes we postpone, right? So I have some friends like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I love that specific Nextflow training material. I'm going to do it someday. And I never do because, well, life goes on, right? So we had this idea of, it's free for everyone, always available. But what if we create a Nextflow training week every quarter? You can organize yourself to focus on the training that week. We can have quizzes. If you get the good score, you get a certificate of accomplishment. We're going to be live on Zoom every day to answer all your questions. We cannot do this the whole year, but the training week, we can do that for you. The community forum, all the ambassadors will be there to make sure they answer your questions as well as possible in good speed and so on. And last year, in the Q4 one, we had about 500 people registered for the training week, only for the Q4 training. Then we have the Q3, Q2, and Q1, right? So there's about over 1,000 people registered for these trainings. A lot of them getting the certificates, learning Nextflow, right? And sometimes it's just like the push you need, just the poke you need to, okay, it's a training week, I'm going to learn now. And lots of people have taken advantage of that. So it was very, very nice.
I think I need to pull out my green screen again and pretty soon, because we're talking about all these language updates, which is fantastic for Nextflow. But anyone who's working on the Nextflow training material, which is actually several of us on this call, you can see us quietly kind of pulling our hair out because we know we're going to have to update all the training material.
For the next training week, which is going to be, all the material will be updated, at least the introductory ones will be updated through all the new syntax, right? So we're going to learn the newest, best way.
Guys, I think we did it.
Congratulations to everyone for sticking with us for so long.
It's a big year.
I think this is a good impetus not to let it go 6 months without without a podcast.
Exactly.
That's the lesson from today.
What a year. What an amazing year. When you put it all in context and you see it all kind of written out, you know, it's going to take me a while, but I'm going to stick in loads of links about all the stuff we've talked about in the show notes for here. So you can go and find the YouTube talks, and you can find the blog posts and everything. There's just so much stuff. And I'm sure that there's loads of stuff we haven't talked about as well, which I will remember in about half an hour when we stop recording.
And so much of it is building towards setting the foundations for the future as well. Like it's because it's real sense of acceleration. Like there's so much new stuff to build new stuff.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. I think when you're a parent, when you first become a parent, they say the days are long, but the years are short. It kind of feels a little bit like that working at Seqera.
A good way, I hope. The sleep deprivation and the anxiety and
No, I mean, yeah, like we're all invested and all, you know, wanting to see the best of things. So, yeah.
And a lot of this stuff we've been talking about for years as well. Like all this stuff about error messages in Nextflow. This has not come out of nowhere. I find it so gratifying to finally after years be able to say, yes, we have a solution for you, and it's getting better. And also seeing how well that's been received by the community as well. It's extremely satisfying. Right, on that note, thank you everyone. If you made it this far, congratulations. Send me an email. I'll send you a certificate to put on your wall. And yeah, stay tuned. I'm hoping to get many more episodes out in 2026. So we're going to have much more specific deep dives on different topics in the near future. So get that, like and subscribe, you get that Spotify subscription running and whatever else it is that you do. And you'll hear you soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks all.
So.
Yes.